Transforming community, peace in our human family, volume and unity, divine light shining individually, collectively transforming community, peace in our human family.
One love, one growth, as above, so below. Feel the pain in my soul, the red pill dissolved. Organized, no matter the cost. Politicians start wars, they don't fight, they send the poor. And nothing lasts forever as long as we stay together. Give hell to the masses, watch the unity rapture. This is for the kids and the culture. It's one love, one growth, one light, light warriors. What's up, Brad?
How's it going?
Brad Macdowall, right? That's how you
McDowell.
McDowell. Let's go, McDowell. Awesome. You are a city councilman, and you are also running for mayor.
Yeah.
I believe we're about the same age, right? Or
I'm 28.
You're 28. Okay, so I'm 29, so I got you by a year.
Yeah.
That's freaking awesome. Good to see young people like us trying to like do something like this and get it going, because we need more reputation like that. You know what I mean? Like, that's so fucking dope. For the audience, if you could give them like a brief background on how you got into being a city councilman and how you got involved with into politics. And, a little background where you're from and all that stuff.
Yeah, I'll try. It's a long story. I actually ended up going into it, right? I feel like, politicians get into it for one of two reasons, right? Either they want to be a politician, or something happens and they just get involved, right? Like they get involved as an organizer to try to fix things. And that's sort of, the latter is sort of what happened for me, right? So I had kind of just accidentally gotten involved in campaigns during college. I studied political science. Kind of thought about going, like I was toying with going to law school, and a professor of mine I found out like 2 years in, he was like, yeah, you have to get involved in campaigns at some point. You have to have an experiential credit. So I got involved with the Democratic Party in 2014. There were actually 3 choices for governor at the time, and none of them were great, but there were some really awesome state candidates that you got to work with, though, like State Representative Robin Porter. I got to do some work for in 2014. So, definitely was an amazing experience. And I found a place where I was like, oh, this is awesome, right? Like, I feel like I'm making a tangible change. So I stuck with it. I ended up working for Bernie in New Hampshire in 2015-16 for that primary. That was pretty awesome. And then ended up coming back to Connecticut, and after graduation I ran a Senate race, which is where I ran back into Justin. Justin and I had known each other in high school, and ran back into him at this Senate race, and we worked together on that. Meanwhile, there was this community in Hamden called Rocky Top, and there was going to be this environmentally disastrous development. Come to find out, this guy wasn't even going to finish the development. He was going to blast 98 feet off the top of a mountain, which was going to be massively environmentally disastrous. He wasn't going to finish the project. He was going to mine $12 to $15 million of trap rock out of that, and then bankrupt and leave the project undone. Yeah, so it was messy. So the community kind of came together, organized around that, and the elected leaders like in that community didn't show up. And so I put a call out to them, and I was like, listen, you're elected for this. You have to show up. I'm out here in other communities running campaigns. Don't think that I won't do this for my own community. I think I was 22, 23 at the time.
Dumb young.
Yeah. And like, they didn't take me seriously, right? So they didn't show up, and we ran and we won. So that was kind of how I stumbled into eventually running for office. And then, once you get involved in city council, you start seeing that there are a lot of other deeper issues involved. So it's been a wild ride. We've been able to do a lot of great things, but there's a lot of things that we have yet to be able to accomplish. And I think that taking the mayor's office is key to getting that done.
Word. Well, how's it going, Justin?
Going all right. I apologize. I was a couple minutes late on
Oh
here.
no, you're fine, bro. You're fine. I was just asking Brad about how did he get involved. And I just realized we're all about the same age, which is fucking dope. uh, so if you could give like a summary of how you got involved into becoming city councilman.
I well, I think as time goes on, that becomes a more and more interesting conversation for me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, as you know, I've always been doing activism, and that activism was really born out of 17. I was diagnosed with Tourette's, wear noise canceling headphones because I'm sensitive to noise.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I always kind of had a philosophy of like, man, I really care, but people suck. Like I'm just like I don't know, like nah. So I was like, cool. I'm gonna be a marine biologist. I'm gonna take care of these fish. I'm gonna take care of this ocean,
Wow, nice.
and like people. Ah. And then I got sick at 17, and from there I
Mm,
just got involved in the labor movement, got involved in the environmental movement, women rights, just was everywhere, right?
nice.
Um, and for one of my classes, for a political science class, I was trying to figure out how to do all these different things. I needed a quick class to take. The irony was that I took, I could either take a research methods class or I could take um, an internship. So I took an
Mm,
internship because it was so late. Uh, they were like, the professor was like, listen, fam, you can take this board and research methods class or you can take an internship. So I can set you up, put you on a campaign,
mm.
work on a campaign. I was like, cool. All politicians are feds and sellouts. I'm not interested in it. Um, thought about it. They don't do anything.
Mm,
For the most part, that has not changed.
mhm.
My perspective of that has not changed much.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
I told him like, yeah, no, he's like, cool. Well, you can do this research methods class and like, write a 500-page report and da. I was like, cool. I'm I'm gonna work on a campaign, right? So I've worked on campaigns for fraud. Um, at the time, the labor movement in New Haven was encouraging me to run uh,
Nice.
in New Haven, and at the same time, Brad was encouraging me because he was planning on running. He's like, "You should run in Hamden," and I was just like,
Mm.
"Well, everybody and the mother's like I should be running," and I'm just like, didn't y'all just hear me say all politicians are feds and sellouts? Like, what? Y'all seem to be confused. Like, am I speaking a foreign language? Like, apparently people understand what I'm saying. Like, um, and then Trump won um, in
Yeah.
20, and so I was like, cool. I'm gonna run an issues campaign and show my community, like, yo, I could show you better than I could tell you, right?
Mm. Right.
Hamden
Right.
has some low key racism. I would say high key racism now, right? It ain't even low key,
Mm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I wanted to point out the issues and say, hey, we need to do better. We need to get it right. And to my surprise, I won. And since then, I've been involved, and I kind of just like, hold on, why'd y'all elect me? I was here to like call, like, right? I'm like, yo, why are you electing me?
Look, let me just say, man, I feel like, all right, you know how they talk about the squad in DC? I feel like you guys are literally the squad in Hamden. I want to tell a quick story before I segue to some questions. One thing that I love about this, when I first met you, Brad, I didn't even meet you. I was scanning you. I was researching into you actually. I don't know if Justin Farmer remember, but I came up to him one time. I was like, "Yo, that's your boy. What he about?" Like, you know what I mean? And everything I've saw has just been so great. You guys have been on the front lines 24/7, battling with those councilmen and councilwomen, and just always representing the community. And you guys see me on Facebook. I always go in on the Democrats the most because as a leftist, you know, I feel like it's my job to talk shit about the DNC whenever they're fucking up. And of course, the Republicans are bad, but I think it's important to have a conversation about what's going on with the Democratic Party if we're going to actually want them to be involved in our lives in so much in a bigger way. So one thing I see is like you guys are like one of the most best examples of how the Democratic Party can change and how it could be actually for the people. And my first question is before I get into the few questions that the Hamden your Hamden constituents have asked. Do you think it's worth? Because I noticed, Justin, that you also mentioned about like your issues with the political science. Brad and Justin, do you guys think it's worth trying to? Do you think there's a value in the political science courses that are within this country, or do you think there should be like a revamp of what actual political science is? And which whoever wants to go first can answer that question.
I mean, I'll say so. I think there's a lot of different factors there, right? There's a lot of different schools, a lot of different professors. I got lucky that I had one, and not to say that I didn't have 3 or 4 like amazing professors, but there was one in particular who really, like for me, college was not. I was not the best student, right? Like that's not that I was disruptive. I was very involved in conversation in class. I found the conversation very interesting, but I also worked 3 jobs while I was in school, right? Like just what I had to do to get by and get through school, right? So for me, it was like, what can I do to pay my bills and also get this degree, right? Sometimes that meant going in and working a shift and missing an assignment that I knew that I could miss without failing, right? So without failing the class. So, you know, there was one professor in particular who I think identified that and always was incredibly accommodating to that. You know, not necessarily that I got endless extensions, but saw that there was potential for me to be involved in things in the community in a way that, you know, homework just wasn't going to cut it, right? So I would say that for me, that was what was really valuable. There, I had incredible classes, right? Dr. Brown Dean is one person in particular who is a local scholar, and I know that she's worked at Yale. She's now she's still at Quinnipiac, and in particular, I know that she's done PBS documentaries, things of that nature. So I had access to amazing scholars, but like I said, this one professor who really saw that there was potential outside the classroom, I wouldn't be in this position without that person. So I think that, yeah, in the classroom is definitely valuable, but that one individual, that one professor was really what made, I think, the difference for me. So I don't know if that directly answered your question. Of course, I think there's value to the education, but I also think we need, you know, that professor took a holistic approach that I think was life-changing for me.
Yeah, I would say no, right? I and I'm coming from a left perspective that, you know, the way that we teach, first of all, depending on who you get, right? And I think Professor Wharton at Southern Connecticut, despite him being a libertarian, really a light Republican, I think the funny thing is he's probably one of the professors I've seen who's really, if students say they're interested in politics, he really tries to connect them with the resources and information to do so. I think most political science departments, from what I see, they teach popular events. They teach about situations. It's more historic. Some of them go into data, right? Like how data is collected and how data is informed for politics, but don't actually talk about power, right? That's so much what politics is about. It's about power. It's about who has it and who uses it and how to use it and coalitions, right? And I don't think that is really explained in American politics, especially in education. I don't think there is really a historical context. Like when we talk about our politics, we don't really talk about contemporary times. We either talk about the American Revolution, talk about the Civil War. Sometimes we'll talk about the Civil Rights era, but you know, post 1970s. So, and you get some courses that talk about uh, uh, post 9/11
Mm-hmm.
and got about Patriot Act, things like that. But we don't really talk about. We make it seem like America always had two parties. That is false,
Yeah.
right? It was the Whig Party.
Oh yeah.
Like it was like 4 or 5 parties, right? Like we don't talk about that,
Right.
right? We don't talk about the fact that, right? People always say, "Oh, white men landowners." I'm like, fam, originally it wasn't even landowners
Mm-hmm.
had exclusive rights to vote, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I would say, in general, the way we teach political science is more historic and not is. I think there are very few schools, right? Like the Harvard Kennedy School, right?
Mm-hmm.
Teach people like, yo, we gonna put you on politics, right?
Mm.
And the schools that do are like the Harvard Kennedy School, where it's just like, I ain't going to the Harvard Kennedy School, right? Like, go like even if I knew, right?
Yeah.
Even if I could go back in time and I knew,
Yeah.
I ain't going to the Harvard Kennedy School.
Oh damn! All right. So Hamden, this beautiful city that is above New Haven. Um, we have built great relationships with being on the streets, and also you guys fighting to make sure that everyone gets a platform. When there were hearings going on, and we were there all night, stuff like that. How do you feel about the climate now? With Mayor Lane being in office still, with police brutality. How do you guys feel about Hamden right now? Is there any shift of changes, or do you think that there needs to be a big incentive going on with tackling this police issue?
Yeah, I don't. There has been no change. There's been no change. There's been we're gonna put out statements. We're gonna say things, right? But
Mhm.
that's like, hey, we're gonna declare racism a public health emergency, but then we're gonna divert $33,498 from COVID money for PPE to buying the police department a drone, right?
Oh God.
So yeah, so it's like, it's frustrating, right? Because people are seeing things like, oh, Hamden declared racism a public health emergency, right? Oh, the mayor put out a statement acknowledging X, Y, or Z, right? They must be doing something about it, right? And the answer to that is just no, right?
Yeah.
So, I think that, if we obviously need radical change on that issue, and it's just not moving. The needle has not moved.
If I can uh, 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 deviate from your question and then come back to it,
Okay.
I think, you know, it is clear after last year, it's always been clear, right? Public safety has to be reimagined, right? And I think something that a lot of people grapple with, well, actually, I would argue actually not a lot of people grapple with it. A lot of people are discomfort of thinking and envisioning and actively participating in what public
Yes.
safety means and what it is, right? Because
Yes.
when we say public safety, people think of policing. It's like, well, you're not for public safety. You want criminals to run around. You want this. It's like, no, I want public safety, right? I want to be able to go to the corner store and not worry if dude looking at me weird is gonna pull a gun, right? Right? But like I think when we talk about what public safety is, that becomes much different, right? Public safety is knowing that, all right, you know, not only that I can go to the store and not have someone pull a gun on me, but that I don't get hit by a car, right? Because people are actually following our laws for the roads, right? Public safety is, right, that people are wearing masks when there's super contagious variants of diseases that are airborne and transmittal, right?
Right.
Public safety is making sure that we actually deal with the climate crisis so that we don't have, right? In Germany, you just had 200 people die from a historic flood
Right.
where it basically rained the amount of rain that they get in a month, right? They got in like 2 days, right? In,
Jesus.
in China, right? The amount of rain that they give in that province in a year, they got in a day, right?
Jesus.
And flooded out. 30 people were killed, right?
Wow.
That is public safety. And we don't talk about that aspect of public safety. But to bring it back to a Hamden context, right?
Hmm.
Do I think police brutality is being dealt with? I'm not sure, right? During the pandemic, we had 6 months go by where our traffic commission, who is also our police commission, did not meet.
Jesus.
They did not take the complaints of community members. They were not looking into keeping our streets safe in terms as a bicyclist, right? As
Hmm.
a got flexing now, got my one wheel, right? As a person who uses alternative transportation, right?
Right.
As a
Right.
person walking through a crosswalk, that is also public safety. That has not been addressed. In terms of police misconduct, we would rather have PR campaigns to talk about police being good people, right?
Yeah.
Rather than to talk about public safety. Fam, nobody is out here saying politicians are good people, right? Nobody is spending all a ton of this money and be like, have your kids hang out with politicians and know that they're not all corrupt, right? If I was like, hey, have your kids hang out with politicians and actually know that we do work that is important to them and that we're not all sellout and thieves and feds and ops,
Hmm.
right? People be like, I'm not really interested in that, right? But then we do it with police, and it's like, well, people have to know to trust and go and communicate with the police.
Right.
Cool. I would argue the same thing about politics, and I don't even like politicians,
Right.
right? But that is not what we are talking about, right? We're talking about when abuses of power happen, are the police being held accountable? And we are talking about, are we keeping people safe,
Mm.
right? And I think a lot of these conversations have come down to moral conversations about whether people are good or bad. I'll surmise my thoughts with this. I had an officer was wearing normal clothes. It was happened to be the verdict of Derek Chauvin, not the verdict, but the sentencing hearing.
Hmm.
Um, and a police cruiser saw me, and I was like, all right, whatever. Kind of looked at them. They kind of looked at me. I'm like, okay, that was kind of weird. But I was like, cool. I'm gonna bop and keep it dipping, right? I'm
Hmm.
gonna just listening to my music. I'm on my bike. I'm like, okay, let's go, right? Um, and then the police car circles around to where I would get back onto the bike path and cuts me off at the bike path at the intersection and stops me and was like, "Are you Justin Farmer?" I was just like, "Yes." Like, what's going on? Like, oh, I just wanted to let you know I'm a cop. I live in town. I wanted you to know we're not all bad people, and there's some of us who are doing good stuff. And da, da, da. I'm like, cool, fam. I have family members who are law enforcement officers. I have family members in the military, right? I don't feel that we need more military intervention, right?
Yeah.
I don't feel that policing, right? I believe that policing as we have it now should be abolished, right? I'm more interested in public safety than policing. I'm not concerned with controlling people's behavior to make them be accountable. I'm more invested and interested in investing in creating a community that holds each other accountable, right?
Mm. Mm.
And this, and I was like, cool, fam. I don't have the privilege of choosing who I get to work with, right? We have such dire situations and communities first need. Like,
Right.
oh, here's my business card. Link up with me, talk with me. I'm willing to talk with you. I'm willing to work with you on stuff that needs to be worked on.
Right.
But let me be clear, I do not believe policing as an institution should exist. As
Right.
is, I just don't, right? It demonstrably has to be changed so much so that you could not call it the same institution. It's not a distinction without a
Mm,
difference, right? It's very different because fundamentally you would have to change so much that it wouldn't be feasible to call it policing,
mm,
right?
mm.
So I don't think that has changed in Hamden, right? I see Hamden, we're gonna do a POW. We're gonna have our police play with kids and get paid overtime to play sports with kids. That's not public safety,
Yeah.
right?
God no, because yeah, they're playing with kids one day, then they're gonna shoot the kid the next day. Like it's
Well,
just
not even that. I'm just like, yo, the money to keep these kids off of the street, the money for programming, right? Why am I
Mhm.
paying you time to hang out with kids, right?
that
That cool. I should be paying
too. Yep,
experts
that too.
who hang out with kids, who teach them and put knowledge into their brain and redirect them, right? Experts to do that, right?
Right.
I'm not gonna go and send my plumber to go and fix, my computer, right? So I
Hmm.
don't understand, like, when it comes to public safety, there are times where we have policing. We act as policing is the tool that fix everything in public safety, and I'm like, cool, you know, whether you like them or not, right? Dr. Fauci telling me health advice on what's going on with COVID for masks, that is effective. Having police come around and be like, you better wear your mask, otherwise I'm gonna put you in jail. Like that don't help the police. That don't help me. That don't help keep people safe, right?
No.
So
Yeah.
I would say I would say in Hamden, we are still wedded to this idea of policing people
Hmm.
rather than to figure out what public safety is.
Hmm. Well, thank you for that. That actually helps me because you actually both of y'all mentioned something about money, which is such a big deal. And a lot of the rhetoric you're hearing now, which you have mentioned, Justin, is about abolishing the police is something that I agree with. It's also a nuanced conversation as well too, and I see Brad is definitely in agreement as well with that too. But right now, you see that the big mainstream thing is defund the police. Is that something that for Brad basically on you're running for mayor? So is there something that you are thinking about like putting together to talk about defunding the police? And that actually is a question that a Hamden constituent asked me last night. Is like if you guys are, where would the money be allocated to?
Right.
Yeah.
So we have to be thinking about where we're putting money and whether it's producing the result that we're looking for, right? Had this conversation time and time again during budget season. Are we getting the results that we're expecting out of it? Like every dollar we put somewhere, we should have a tangible expectation about what that's going to produce. And if it doesn't produce that, we should be asking whether or not that dollar continues to be spent there. So does money need to be reallocated to public safety? Absolutely. Right. That's absolutely, that's a bare minimum. We need to be figuring out, cool, we don't have public safety right now. The public is not safe. How do we fix that? Right. So absolutely. I think there's a lot of people that need to be at the table for that conversation. That's not something that I think ought to be, decided unilaterally by one person. However, I will say that like for the cost of the bike patrols, which by the way, I don't know if Justin talks about it a lot, so it's out there, but the bike patrols, every time you see a cop on a bike, that's overtime, right? They don't do that.
Oh,
What
wow.
they say, hey, we're transitioning to community police, but it's going to happen on overtime, right?
Oh, wow.
So all that bike patrol happens on overtime. You could house every homeless person in Hamden for the cost of that bike police, that overtime budget right there, that houses every homeless person in Hamden, right? When we're talking about food insecurity, which something like 13%, and I believe that was a severely undercounted number, but something like 13% of Hamden residents were severely food insecure before the pandemic. We're talking about like 2 years before the pandemic, right? 2018-ish, that was the number. That number has skyrocketed. We had cars lining out the parking lot of the middle school, right?
Wow.
For food. And that was the folks that had cars to get to the middle school, right? So we need to think a lot more about allocating resources to those kinds of initiatives, right, that are going to keep people fed, housed, I think that helps. That is the tip of the iceberg in terms of addressing those issues, right, and helping people not be in a situation of desperation where they feel like they need to do something to help feed their family, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, absolutely. And then I think Justin, I don't think I could really say it any better than Justin, right? What we're doing right now is not, we've tied these two things together, right? Policing is public safety, right? And it's wild to me, right? Because people don't do the same thing for education, right? Board of Education in the last decade, and I'm not including this budget, but like in the 10 years prior to the budget that we have now, the Board of Ed saw a 14% increase in their budget. The police department saw something like that. It was like 40 something percent, right? I can't remember the exact number. It was a while ago that we did this. The police saw 40 something percent. Now, when people look at education, they're like, hey, the data, the metrics, students are not better now than they were 10 years ago. So where's this money going, right? And we know that it is just disproportionately going towards administrative costs, and that is an issue, right? But for some reason, you have a lot of people in town who can look at the Board of Ed and say critically, hey, that 14% increase hasn't translated into better results. What's going on here? We need to think about the money that we're spending at the Board of Ed. But then when you have, when we talk about crime or public safety, you hear the opposite. Well, we need more cops. Throw more money at the police department. It's like that hasn't kept us safe. To the tune of, I think it was 40, and again, it was the mid 40s somewhere. I think it was 47% in the last year. To the Board of Ed's 14%.
Wow.
What if we're thinking about public safety? Education would be a much better investment, right? Education ends up in the classroom, right? And it not education alone, but we need to think critically about things like education, economic development that actually brings good jobs and benefits to the community, housing, food security, right? Those are the things that are going to help lift up communities in a way that this other nonsense doesn't need to happen, right? So I think we need to be more proactive and less reactionary. And policing is inherently a reactionary institution.
Oh my God, facts.
They show up after things have happened, right? And I like I said, one person is not going to be able to decide the solutions. There are a lot of people that need to come to the table, but I think that's part of what we're trying to do here, right? I think we're trying to democratize the decision-making process. We have a bunch of people in a back room right now making decisions in the town hall, making decisions in the government center, right? Maybe some of those are taking place on Zoom right now, but there's a very few set of people who are making all of the decisions for, I don't know where our census numbers are going to end up next month, but I think they're going to be somewhere closer to 70,000, right? In the past, we've been 62, 63,000. Hamden's seen a big boom. So if the census is anywhere near accurate, I think we'll be closer to 70,000 people. We got 70,000 people in this town, and you maybe have a dozen, maybe 20 that are really making decisions, and some council members are not even in that room, right? So I think we need to really involve community in these decision-making processes, and that's how we're gonna get where we need to go. But thinking critically about where we're spending money right now and why it's not producing the results that we expect, the solution's not throwing more money there. It's figuring out where the money we're already spending needs to go, and it needs to go somewhere different.
Thank you, Brad. That was a dope answer.
I appreciate it. I know I'm not the best at brevity, but
you're good. So I like how you mentioned also schooling, because that's another question that my Hamden friends also mentioned. A mother especially, she was talking about how the schools, and you were saying about how the money literally is 14% they were getting compared to a budget that what the police were getting.
Yeah,
and she was concerned about the schools, basically their schools being closed down and everything, and she doesn't know exactly what kind of, like, her kid is very young right now, a toddler, so she's trying to figure out what kind of education she could try to get her kid to have the best education in Hamden. And she's a person of color as well too.
So sorry, go ahead.
So yeah, basically, I'm sorry, I just went on the whole explaining, but basically, is there any plans, like what would you think should be like the best way? And this is just an answer that could be changed over time, but like, do you think there's a solution to trying to keep these schools up, or is there any other options of how for like schools closing and anything, how to keep them going or anything?
So a couple things there, right? The first thing I'll say is that the unfortunate part about that mother and the decision that she's making about like, or the, I guess the thought process there, right? About like, what kind of education is my child going to get, right? The unfortunate thing is, if I'm going to answer that question honestly, I have to ask what community she lives in, right? And like that right there, we know we're not on good terms, right? Because the education that you get, it depends on what elementary school you go to, right? And not only that, right, but even when you get to the middle school and the high school, where everyone is together in one building, being together in one building does not necessarily mean that students are together getting the same education, right? Because the education and the resources that you had access to in elementary school largely determine the classes that you end up in middle school, which we see that the classes in middle and high school in Hamden are very segregated, right? They are very segregated. So that is it's an unfortunate reality, but like I couldn't answer that question honestly without knowing what school that child is going to end up being districted into, right? So thinking about that is a critical first step. The other thing is when we talk about the Board of Education getting a 14% increase over the previous 10 budgets, not this. I haven't done the math with this current budget because we just got it, or we just finished it up. But the previous 10 years, 14% increase, right? The problem is that has disproportionately ended up at 60 Putnam Avenue, like the downtown Board of Ed offices, right? It has ended up with non-contractual administrative raises. It has ended up with new positions. It has ended up, in a myriad of other places that aren't the classroom, right? And it's not just students that aren't being supported, right? Teachers, paras, custodians, right? Custodians who spent the last 2 years making sure that classrooms were clean and safe, right? We could talk about administrators like administrators like principals or our paraprofessionals, right? Even our nurses are really stretched thin, right? When all of those individuals, the staff and faculty in those buildings are not getting the support, that translates to students not getting support. In addition to the students not getting support, the staff and faculty is just stretched thin, right? So when we think about Board of Education budgeting, we need to be making sure that money ends up in the classroom and in the building where the students are, not at 60 Putnam Avenue. I think that's been one of our most difficult, one of the most difficult things that we have yet to address. But we also have to talk about equity, right? Because the school district is just currently not equitable in any way, shape, or form. I am excited about a couple of Board of Education candidates, right? Like Miriam Khan, who's running. I think she's 19 years old, right? Wow. She's done an amazing job as the student rep on the Board of Education for a couple of years. She's like, I want to stay on, right? So she's running for political office right now. And like, I'm really excited to see that. I think that high school students now and recent graduates are much more present, right? They see the problems and they see it as urgent that they get involved and address them. So I'm excited about some Board of Education candidates that we have coming up and our ability to work with them to try to fix that. But again, that's another thing that's going to have to be a lot of people at the table, right? You need teachers, you need paras, you need nurses, you need custodial staff, you need principals, you need parents, right? Special education professionals. You need a lot of people at that table, right? And that also requires that people are at that table from an equity perspective too, right? You need to have people that know what it means to be talking about equity, not only in the classroom, but in terms of talent acquisition and promotions and that kind of thing, right? So forgive me. I know that went in a lot of different directions.
Oh no.
It is.
The question I thought was going to go into that direction anyway. Like
it's a lot of different pieces. It's a lot of different pieces, and I know Justin is probably going to have his own thoughts, but it's a lot of different pieces, and a lot of different people are going to have to be at that table to make sure that we are doing what is best for every student, right? That's key.
Thank you. Justin, is there anything else that you would like to add on to that? I know you guys went to the same school, so that's actually a pretty good thing as well.
So we went to the same high school.
Yeah.
I'll say this just to wrap the last thing about the whole idea of defund the police.
Mm-hmm.
Um, as someone who believes in abolition, right?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, cool. Like who, right? Like I kind of laugh when like, cool. Do police do important work? Yeah, cool. Yes, they do, right? Do they have to deal with dangerous situations? Absolutely, right? Does the military as well? Absolutely, right? Do I always agree with the decisions that they make? No, right? Um, but abolition and even defunding, right? I laugh. If I said we're going to defund the police 1% each year, right? People would freak out.
Oh God, yeah. Oh God, yeah.
1% means that the abolition of police would happen 100 years from now.
Shit.
That's forever from now, fam. I'm
Yeah.
like, cool. Like, if we're serious about thinking about public safety and redesigning and rethinking it,
Mm-hmm.
a century is a long time to figure out something, right? The last thing I'll say on that is that you know when you're working from an abolition mindset, right? When you look at slavery, right? People are like, cool, slavery as an institution should be done, right? There'd be time to transition, right? But you have people who fought in the American Revolutionary War, who fought in the war, and liberation, in some sense, didn't even come till a century later, right? Until
Mm-hmm.
the Civil War, right? So you have people who fought in the American Revolutionary War, and their children, right, and their children's children, right,
Mm-hmm.
actually got to see that promise. When it comes to education, right, we are talking about we're talking about 20 years, right? So every year, right, we're talking about what will that person's education look like 2 decades from now? Will we make the demonstrable changes so that 2 decades from now they can be a, in quotations, productive member of society where they will have a job that has uh, 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 not just value, right? Because workers make wealth, right? All jobs are inherently valuable, right?
Right.
But
Right.
enough value to make them have an affordable living, right? Until
Right.
we can change our construct of work, that is not a thing. It should be a thing. But will we prepare them, right? So we're talking
Mm-hmm.
about pre-K, right? That is something that will be an equalizer. As we know, the first year of birth costs around $20,000, right? But when
Mm-hmm.
we look at this, we often leave out equity. We love to talk about fairness. Well, fairness, Justin, fairness, cool. Someone in Spring Glen who brings in $200,000 a year, saving $20,000 a year for the first 3 years, for the first, let's say three, so three, four, five, right? Up until they're five, right? They see $60,000. Saving $60,000 for that family in Spring Glen means something different
Mm-hmm.
than saving $60,000 for someone from Newhall, right? And like, if we really want to change, right? If we want to make sure that it doesn't matter what part of town you're talking about, that means we need to have equity. That
Mm-hmm.
means that we need to get rid of these leveled systems, right? Having leveled systems is perpetually setting up other students to fail. Because what we're
Right.
saying, we're not teaching students how to think critically. We're not teaching them how to achieve to the best of their ability. But what we're doing is we're saying that we're going to put some people on a fast track, and whether they can be prepared for that work or not, we're going to put them on the fast track, and it doesn't even matter, right? There were AP classes. I was in the AP class. There were kids who were like, yeah, we got D's and C's, right?
Mm-hmm.
But they knew they were going to get into a good school, right? Or that their grade would be curved. because even though the work was hard and everybody was struggling in the class, the grade point average would be curved, so it wouldn't actually affect them the same way, right?
Right. Right.
Versus you could have a class of kids who are really struggling or really putting in work for C's, and nobody's gonna say, well, you guys are all putting in work for C's, so we're gonna bump that up to a B. That ain't gonna happen. You just cool, go into our class, right?
Right.
Like, we are not preparing our students to actually be educated. So we're not teaching them how to critically think. So the things that we need to do if we're serious about investing in our education is stop sending all the money to 60 Putnam. 2, it's having pre-K, right? 3, it's having equity, right? Between the PTAs and between the course curriculum and things, there needs to be equity. The third thing is we need to, right, get rid of the institutional racism in our schools. And when I say that, we know our schools are racially imbalanced, right? Part of that is the silliness of the state, where the state you can either be 25% or 75%. So for non-white, the max you can have is 74%, right? We had one school that was almost 25, 25, 25, 25, right? 25 white, Black, Hispanic, Asian, and the state was like, that's racially unbalanced. I don't know how they do math, right? Exactly. I don't know how they do math. I right? Four
What
quarters make a dollar. Right? That's what I know, right? So part of those changes need to be on the state, but the other part is, right, if we know, right, my community, I live on the borderline of Hamden and New Haven. I'm 6 houses from being in New Haven, 3 blocks from the R, right? The only reason I go to the best school in town is because it needs to be racially balanced, right?
Wow.
That was
Wow.
the only reason I went to Spring Glen School. That is the only reason why I'm a proud Black Panther, right? Because there's few of us. People always, Black Panther. I'm like, yeah, I'm a Spring Glen Panther. There's very few Black Panthers because there's very few Black kids going to the Spring Glen School, and our mascot is the Panther. I'm like, oh, you get uncomfortable about that. I'm like, wait until I start talking about actual history and teaching our kids about situations, right? Then you're gonna be terrified, right? But I would say the things that we need to do is have equity, start earlier with education. And then the third thing is post education, right? Our high schools do a piss poor job at transitioning. So the students who aren't ready for college, we're not transitioning and telling students, hey, you should go to Job Corps, right? And go and get an education. And then maybe instead of taking a year off, you're taking a year where you're learning a skill and you can get some bread in your pocket and then go to college. We're not transitioning people to trade schools and saying, all right, we're going to send you, right? We're starting to do that with advanced manufacturing, but they're, right? EMT certificate, right? If you get your EMT certificate, right, you can get that by the time you can do that while you're 16, 17. By the time you're 18, have that certificate and start making bread, right? Same with your OSHA certification, right? We're not teaching students to be successful. So if we fail them the ability to have critical thinking, and we're not pointing them in the direction of marketable skills, and we're telling them go to college and spend a ton of money and hopefully you'll figure it out, we are setting students up for failure because we are saddling them with debt before they even have a concept or idea of what debt is and the significance of that debt. So I hope I answered your question.
Oh
But
yeah. Oh yeah. You
that's
guys. Yeah. Yeah. And I wanted to share because you said something about like how they push students through, and I'm a victim of that. I was kept back twice. I was turning 16 in the 8th grade. And my math skills, English skills, all that stuff was not good. And they pushed me to high school. They made me skip 8th grade and made me become a freshman in at Harding High School. This is in Bridgeport. And it was such a struggle. It was such a struggle. My reading labels, everything. And I ended up graduating late, but I still was able to get into college. And I dropped out, went back, got a 4.0, but it was me teaching myself. And I'm, by the way, I'm a dropout again. I got a 4.0 and then I got the press, and now I mean maybe I'll go back one day, but I'm in a lot of college debt now, so we'll see how that goes. But yeah, I totally agree. They push these students. They don't actually take the time, and I think there was a slogan that there was like, "We want kids to be college ready." I don't know if they was using that same slogan in Hamden, but that's what they said in Bridgeport. And the superintendent, he made sure that they will have kids pushed and skipped to make it look good. But when you look at these kids, and me being one of them, these kids' grades, they were not up to par wherever they got skipped at. They were not up to par. They were only skipped because they were probably becoming a teenager in middle school, or they were only skipped because they were probably becoming too old for elementary school, whatever situation that is. But it did it work? No, it did not. And what do we have from that? We have more poverty. And why is there more poverty? Because of education, because of income, all the things that we're talking about this right now, all the things we're talking about right now. And they just put a blind eye. And I don't know if that's still a philosophy that they are continuing to do, but if they are, then y'all are assholes because it didn't work. It didn't work. I'm a living example. The only reason why I was able to buckle down and get better was because I put that initiative in myself, and I had good support until I started getting depressed. That's the only reason why. It was the community that taught me that. It wasn't the school. And I think that if schools will understand that, they will get an understanding of what exactly goes on. But like you also said, Justin, that there's a racist system within as well too. And I believe you also mentioned that too, Brad. And there's a huge structural racist system in it. And I'm so happy that you guys brought that up about the issues with school, because it's such a big, this it's just like, it's not like one answer, like how like Bernie Sanders would be like, we're going to get rid of that. You know, Bernie Sanders will probably even go into the details on that as well too, because it's just so much that goes on. There's so much that goes on, and it's always about the neighborhood. I also went to a school in Trumbull, and I lived in Bridgeport. The reason why I was able to go to school in Trumbull is because I got jumped, and my mom was like, "I gotta get my kid out of here." So I ended up going to a performing arts school after she pled to the principal to accept me, because she's been trying to get me in for the last 2 years since I've been in high school. So that's another thing. It had to be trauma for me to try to get another higher education and everything. So, I resonate with everything that you all are talking about when it comes to schooling. There's so many layers to that. And I think that I feel like whoever's watching this podcast, I feel like for the first time I got more views than I actually you normally do on live. So that's cool, pretty cool. So whoever is singing this, I hope it also resonates with them as well too, because these are really good conversations that we're having. And I have a little, I don't know if this is actually a fun question, but the last question, since we're going into the hour, the last question, do you guys think? Well, not what do you guys think? What are you guys going to do about the potholes in Hamden? That was the comic relief question that we had last night. They were like, "Yo, because it's worse than New Haven, fam." Like that's what they told me.
Fam, I'm a jump right into this one because I right infrastructure, right. I don't even want to hear Build Back Better. I'm like, yo, we need to just fit the bill, right? I'm like, so cool. We have not done a capital project in 6 years, which
Mm,
means we have not bonded out money, meaning borrow money from banks to say we are going to hook up our roads, fix our sidewalks, deal with our storm drains, deal with auxiliary equipment that we need for our departments for them to do their best jobs, right? For the last 2.5 years, almost 3 years at this point, I've been like, we need a capital budget. Every single budget, I'm like, fam, we need a capital budget. Where is the capital budget? I'd like to see the capital budget. When are we getting our capital budget? Can I get the last 5 year actuals for department requests for a capital budget? Can I get a plan for the capital budget? How much money are we going to allocate for our roads? How much money are we going to do for potholes, right? I've been asking. I was like, the other day I said, fam, if me asking for the capital budget was a kid, they'd be 2 years old now. So
Oh man.
I right, I have a street, Armory Street, right? There's a busted pipe underneath. A ton of the pipes are too small in town. In some spots in town, we actually have wooden pipes to which the water allows the wood to petrify and become solid and concrete like.
Mm,
So it still works. In
mm,
some places we have wooden pipes. You would need a capital project, right? To spend the money to put in new pipes, to expand the pipes, to have bigger pipes, especially with all this flooding, right? I mentioned Germany and I mentioned China earlier.
mhm,
All their flooding problems, right? Hamden is actually a perpetual flood zone.
mhm,
Hamden, the town of Hamden is actually a valley that people
mhm,
don't actually really understand that it is, and it's actually a bowl, right? Similar to New Orleans in many respects. And we
mhm,
actually have a river running through our town, right?
mm,
Quinnipiac River, right?
mhm.
So we're actually in 4 different flood zones.
Oh wow, I didn't know that.
Right? Cool. I'm gonna just put it plain. We need a capital budget, right? The next council meeting, right? I told the finance director, the next capital meeting, I'm expecting a capital budget. If
Mm,
there's not one, I am putting you on blast, right? It's not even a question. You gotta
right,
catch this heat if I don't get my capital budget, right?
right, right.
My constituents don't want to hear, oh, Jay, it's going to take $3 million to fix Armory because it's leaking underneath the road, and that's why there's so many. Nah, we don't want to hear that. We want to hear what is the plan that you are going to put in place to fix the issues. How are we going to
Mm,
set aside our bread to make sure that the issues get fixed? Tired of excuses, tired of backlog. And I promise you, because I've been saying this all year, I'm like, we need a capital budget so that we can all do it fairly. If for whatever reason the mayor decides to cut up the roads and streets in a way that's not equitable, that ends up, you know, having certain communities get their roads and sidewalks fixed better or faster than other communities, you want to
mhm.
catch this heat because I've said it all year that it should be equal and equitable, right? We all
Facts.
live in this town, we all pay taxes, we all deserve better quality of life. So I'm glad you asked that question because I wasn't trying to turn up, right? But I, like everybody else, right? Quality of life issues, we pay way too much
Right,
taxes, right? And
right.
people come to us and like, bro, why didn't you get this done? I'm like, yo, go talk to the mayor. Ask the mayor how you gonna be mayor for 6 years and not spend any demonstrable money and make a plan to fix sidewalks and roads. Don't ask me that. Go ask the dude you vote for mayor, right?
Wait, so Mayor Lane hasn't done. So
six
to be clear,
years,
for 6 years he's
no
been in office.
capital budget. So we've done little
Wow.
patches. We've taken a little grant money here and fix this. We've taken a little grant money here and do that, right?
Mhm,
But we have not gone out to bond out money for a capital budget. This is the last thing I'll say. I would like us to set aside 1 million, 2 million, 3 million, right, in our budget to actually put towards sidewalks and roads. We should
mhm,
never, ever, ever go like, oh, we got to go to the bank and borrow money. And if we can't afford to do that, I guess we're just not going to fix roads and sidewalks. We should
right.
never, ever, ever, right? You're not going to be able to bond all that money out to do it all the time, but you
Mm,
should have a program. And this is the last thought. Mayor
mm,
Jackson was like, hey, when he was mayor like 6 years ago, it costs about $3 to $5 million a year to patch our roads and to fix our sidewalks to keep us current. Just to keep everything level and status quo 5 years ago cost us $3 to $5 million. This year our capital budget is only 10 million and only 3 million is going to sidewalks and paving.
mm,
If we're serious about this issue, we're going to set aside the money. Director Austin, who is our town engineer, has a plan, right? He made a plan as far as 20 years, right? The
mhm.
question is, what are we going to do to make sure we have the money in the budget to do so? So I apologize. I'm done.
Well, if I can, I mean, like, I love that infrastructure was the first, like, I think it was like the first word you said, right? Like that's what it is. It's not just maintenance, right? Filling potholes is that's less than Band-Aid, right? Because as soon as the weather changes, the roads are gonna shift, and that filling is just gonna pop right out, right? It's gonna be another pothole in 6 months, right, or less, right? So we need to think critically about infrastructure and our plan there, and it needs to be holistic. So we could talk about public transportation infrastructure. We could talk about, all the other things that we need to do in terms of infrastructure, fiber optics. Where Justin talked a lot about the water systems. There's parts of Route 10, our major throughway, that don't have sewer systems. People are on like Whitney Avenue are on sewer, or they're on septic, right? It's asinine, right?
That's medieval.
So I'm like, cool. For decades, we are decades behind on infrastructure development, but also then you had the housing crisis in 2008, and then the subsequent budget shortfall. You had a problem where one of the things that they just stopped doing was paving roads. So you have this massive backlog of roads, among other things, right? Roads, sidewalks, and like ton other constituent requests and basic maintenance, right? All maintenance stop. We have fire stations that are just falling apart, right? And so I could go on about this. I think Justin said it perfectly, though. It's about a critical plan for infrastructure development, right?
Right.
There are things that we could do in the short term, right? There are different ways that we could fill potholes so that they don't pop out when the weather changes, right? There's new technology that we could invest in, different stuff that is more flexible, that doesn't pop out, right? So there are Band-Aids out there that are better for the short term, but we have to think holistically about building a plan to get us back. And like Justin said, every year that we wait, that plan becomes more expensive annually, right? So that is urgent, especially if we're talking about not just infrastructure, but if we're talking about financial security, right? Our financial future, right? It is predicated on building a plan that gets us somewhere before that cost becomes too burdensome to buy in. We have, then at that point we're in a different position, having a different conversation. So I'll leave it at that.
Oh man, thank you, Brad. Thank you, Justin, for coming on my podcast. And this was a great conversation, very educational, and I hope that all the viewers also enjoyed this as well too. You'll definitely find this out on Spotify and all other platforms tomorrow afternoon. And I want to thank you all for your time. Please come again. Season 2 is going to happen. Season 4 is going to happen. Whichever season is going to happen, you are always welcome, guys. And this is a dope conversation we had. So I just want to say, do you guys have any last final words? I like to end it that way because set the mood.
Reach out. We cannot do this work without you. So you can link me on all social media platforms, everything except for Reddit and Tumblr, right? Everything else you can find me Justin for CT, JUSTIN FOR CT, right? You can find me Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. I even got the TikTok, right? So do that dance and be like, cool, infrastructure. Right? Like, link me, because there's tons of work to do. And also, if you have ideas or thoughts about what you would like to see, feel free to share that as well. And thank you, Jamar, for having us.
Thank you so much for being on.
I'll do the same thing. I'll plug the social media at Brad Macdowall on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. I think it's critically important that we are, it takes a village, right? This is not something that Justin and I can do alone. It requires everybody getting in together and pitching in to change these things, to make this radical change. So link up, throw your ideas out there. There is always work to be done, and we need help with that work. You can also add to our email list if you go to Brad for Hamden, bradforhamden.com. You can throw your info in there and stay in touch with the campaign and what we're doing there. It's all about, addressing this as a community. So again, not something we could do alone. And thank you for having us on. This is pretty cool. And the conversations you have are incredibly important. I appreciate you including us in that.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. And you guys have a really good day. And be safe.
You too.
And be safe, everyone else that's out there listening. Be safe, everybody. Have a good day.
My brothers, regain your consciousness and seek ye the kingdom.